In Isaiah 6, we hear about God's call to the prophet Isaiah and how Isaiah came to understand and eventually say yes to that call. I wonder if you could start by telling us just a little bit about you and your call story, about how you experienced feeling called to ministry, and also what role that being part of the LGBTQ community played into that process for you.
I'm a cradle Christian. I was born and raised in the Baptist tradition. Growing up as adolescent, that's when I realized that there was something that was uniquely different about me versus the kids that especially the boys that I would hang out with at school. And it challenged me as I went to church because the message that I would hear at church was, in my opinion, rather contradictory. Because on the one hand, I would hear, oh, God loves you. But then on the other hand, if you're not this, this, and this, and this, and this, you're going to be condemned to go to hell. You know, when I got into my late teens, my sexual orientation began to develop even more. You know, my attraction, I was able to identify it more, but it was a conundrum that I lived in perpetually because I thought, okay, this can't be right. This is not right. Oh my goodness. It was nuts because I really thought I was going to burn in hell. In my 18, 19 years old, there was one time that I had this thing in my mind that I thought, okay, wait a second, something's not right here. Something just doesn't jive, doesn't make sense. God either loves everybody or he hates everybody. But this notion that God loves you and then I'm going to send you to hell to burn in hell because no, wait a second, that just doesn't make sense. That makes absolutely no sense to me. And so in my late teens, early 20s, I started seeing God from a broader perspective, a perspective that says, well, God does love the world. The text is very clear. God so loved the world. And that means everything in it. I started to see that particular verse in a different light. I started to understand God in a different light. I started making friends who identified as gay at the time. And growing up in the church, though, I always had an affinity for all things church.
Sure.
There were many people who would tell me, oh, you're going to be a missionary. Oh, you're going to be a preacher. But at the same time, I knew what my life was like, and I would hear what they would say, and I would think there's just no way in hell that I'm ever going to be a preacher if I like boys and these people are saying this stuff. So at that point, I had decided, forget it. I'm just going to be a church pianist for the rest of my life and call it a day.
Sure.
But there was always that little tug of, maybe the church, maybe the church, maybe the church. Fast forward into my late 20s, I was more involved in the church, but I was also more involved in the gay community. By this point, I had already come out to my parents. I came out when I was 20. I had issues at the church. So at one point, the minister one day approached me because they told him that I was gay. And he felt, in his words, that I was not a good moral fit to stand behind the pulpit, which I thought was, oh, okay. So he asked me not to ever lead worship or ever do anything in leadership within the church. And to me, that was, for somebody who was very active in the church since he was a kid, because I've always been involved in some kind of leadership position as a kid, either leading music or playing the piano or just, leading the kids choir, whatever the case it was. I was always active. So to just show up at church and sit there to listen to sermons that I couldn't even agree with, I was like, to hell with that. I'm just leaving. And so I just up and left. Things happen in a funny way because I had made a list of, I made a list of churches that I wanted to visit in no particular order.
Sure.
But they were churches that I thought, or in my mind, I thought they were gay friendly. And the very first church that I decided to visit was Riviera Presbyterian Church. When I walked into Riviera, I saw what appeared to be a whole bunch of lesbian couples and gay couples. And I thought, oh, dear God, what did I step into? What is this? And you know what? It was the absolute best decision I ever made. I never left. As a matter of fact, I never went back to visit the other churches that I had on my list. I walked into Riviera and I stayed there
Hmm.
Lori Krause was the minister at the time, and I credit her and that congregation for reawakening that desire to do mission and ministry in the world, because they helped me believe and reaffirm what I had thought a couple of years prior to this, and that is that God's love is available to everybody. Again, going back to that same text of John 3:16, God so loved the world. Of course, going into ministry, I also thought, I can't possibly be the only gay person that likes to go to church. There are other gay folks that love to go to church, and they would love to find a place to call home. And so that was also another motivating factor for me to pursue ministry. And I felt that tug in my heart. And again, my desire to remind members of the LGBT community that God does love them just the way that they are, regardless of what the institution or some of the institutions want to proclaim.